Senator from Mississippi.
Madam President, I come to the floor to direct members' attention to a very important article on the front page of yesterday's Wall Street Journal, February 10, 2025, by Thomas Grove. The headline states, quote, "Be cruel, how Russia tortured Ukrainians." This is a most disturbing bit of news, and it demonstrates who we're dealing with in hoping somehow that there will be a negotiated settlement of Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of a smaller neighbor that he thought was weaker, in violation of every international law dealing with this. The article begins by and I ask unanimous consent, Madam President, to insert into the congressional record at this point every word of this article by Mr. Grove.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. It starts out by saying that in the beginning of this war, which now has lasted almost 3 years, word came down from the leadership of Vladimir Putin's dictatorship in Russia to prisoners of war captured by the Russian soldiers, from Major General Igor Potapenko. Be cruel, don't pity the Ukrainian prisoners. Now, we all know that war is hell. There's no question about it. And we also are finding out that Russia has learned this. They thought it would be a 1 or 2 day excursion and that they'd be welcomed by pro-Russian Ukrainians as they rolled their tanks in. They found out very differently soon. And 3 years later, we've seen how the Ukrainians have fought and died for their own homeland. But also, once a combatant has been captured, there are very important international rules and regulations and a matter of international law which can be punished by life imprisonment, which can be punished by the death penalty, about treatment of prisoners of war. And this is what we are learning about what Major General Igor Potapenko told the Russian prison officials that they could do. There would be no restrictions against violence against these prisoners of war. The body cameras, mandatory elsewhere in Russia's system, would be gone. Guards would rotate, serving a month at a time in prisons before other teams took their place. Across the country, other units received similar instructions. We're not finding this out, by the way, from some international reporter that somehow got into the system and saw this. This is information given by former Russian prison guards who were so disturbed by these orders that they defected to the West. 3 Russian prison guards are telling the Wall Street Journal and Americans and anyone who would listen about the horrors. This resulted in nearly 3 years of relentless torture. Guards applied electric shocks to prisoners' genitals until the batteries ran out. I'm almost reluctant, Madam President, to speak these words in public. They beat prisoners to inflict maximum damage, experimenting to see what kind of material would be most painful. And then when there were medical problems, as they would surely be, medical treatment was withheld to allow gangrene to fester, forcing amputations. 3 former prison officials told this reporter how Russia planned and executed what United Nations investigators have described as a widespread and systematic torture. Their accounts were supported by official documents, interviews with Ukrainian prisoners, and a person who helped the prison officials defect. And thank God they were able to defect. This is also borne out, Madam President, by a former prisoner of war, Pavel Ivisov, taken prisoner in Mariupol early in the war, was among the first Ukrainian prisoners detained in Russia. For 2.5 years, this 25-year-old combatant, who was entitled to the protections afforded by the Geneva Convention, was instead moved from prison to prison before being released just last October. He said beatings were the worst when he was transferred. After arriving at a penitentiary in Russia's Tver region north of Moscow, he was led into a medical examination room and ordered to strip. Guards shocked him repeatedly with a stun gun while shaving his head and beard. When it was over, he was told to yell, "Glory to Russia, glory to the special forces," and then, still naked, he was ordered to sing the Russian and Soviet national anthems. When he said he didn't know the words, the guards beat him with fists and batons. This is hard to read, but what did the former guards say? Russian citizens who thankfully have been willing to defect and come forward and tell the truth about the vicious, brutal, illegal regime of Vladimir Putin. The former guards described staggering level of violence directed at Ukrainian prisoners. Electric shockers were used often, especially in showers. That officers complained about their running out of batteries too fast. Can't do this anymore because the batteries have gone dead. The guards used police batons until they broke. Officers tested other materials, including insulated hot water pipes, for their ability to cause pain and damage. This is Putin's Russia. This is the regime that some people are hoping we can somehow negotiate with in good faith and depend on them to keep up their end of the bargain. The guards intentionally beat the prisoners at the same spot on their body every day, preventing bruises from healing and causing infection. At least one person died of sepsis because of this type of brutality. And the guards enjoyed their brutality, according to these Russians, who were guards at the facility and who defected rather than countenance what their own government was doing. Ukrainian former POW Andrei Yegorov recalled how guards at a prison in Russia would force prisoners to run 100 yards through the hallway, holding mattresses above their heads. The guards stood to the side and beat them on the ribs as they ran by. When they got to the end of the hall, they would be forced to do sit-ups and push-ups, and each time they came up, the guards would punch them or hit them with a baton. And I would say to my colleagues, Madam President, this is not a bunch of prison guards gone rogue. This is a bunch of prison guards in Vladimir Putin's dictatorship and Vladimir Putin's illegal regime that were following orders from a high-ranking major general. Madam President, there are differences about the United States' interest in Ukraine, but I will tell you that the countries around Ukraine, in the neighborhood, know what they're facing, and they know that if Vladimir Putin succeeds in his illegal war to take over a neighbor, that will not be the end of it. And one can only listen to what we're hearing out of neighboring countries out of the Republic of Georgia, out of neighboring Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russia intends, and the war criminal, Vladimir Putin, intends to return to as much of the old Soviet Union dictatorship as he possibly can. I hope this war ends. And frankly, I've hoped for 3 years under the Biden administration that administration would provide the freedom fighters inside their own country to have the necessary equipment, the necessary ammunition, the necessary permission to defeat this illegal invasion. But I simply, at this point, want to alert anyone who's listening, alert my colleagues, anyone who is listening to the sound of my voice in any way, to the reality of the utter cruelty, the unspeakable conditions that Russia uses in violation of every international law. If Vladimir Putin comes to the negotiating table and agrees to a ceasefire, we need to bear in mind that he is the gentleman who has countenanced this outrage that I've barely been able to speak about today. And any negotiations we have with the Russians and with the current leadership needs to be done in light of the facts as outlined in this independent report. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.